Chapter 3 review, Biomes and Communities. The main factors that you need to be able to do on this particular test is be able to tell me what the limiting factors are and how they influence what is going to be living in any given area. What is the difference between primary and secondary succession? You need to remember what our definitions were from last time. Limiting factors can be biotic or abiotic. Biotic factors would be those that are living, like your producers, predators, prey. Your abiotic would be like non-living, temperature, water, oxygen levels, sunlight, something like that. They can cause one factor, or one population can cause one factor to outgrow the others, which can cause more competition or other problems. An example of this would be if for some reason you suddenly had a fire that went through and burned all the grass, then the rabbits that are in the system may have a harder time surviving, and the fox that feed on those would be impacted also. Ranges of tolerance, I want you to notice in the picture, you have lower amounts of the nutrients that are in this area. The lower amounts are going to have very little or no growth. As the amount increases, you are going to have an increase in the population. The area where population growth is the best is called the optimum range. If you have too much of whatever the nutrient or resource is, then it will eventually have the population that will grow. An example of this could be pH for fish in the water. It could be sunlight and heat for uh, corn plants. Uh, Succession is a orderly progression where you have an ecosystem change from one type of plants and materials that are living there to another. Primary succession is going to start in an area where there is no soil. The first things that are going to be moving in are called pioneer species. An example of pioneer species are in the picture. These are pictures of lichens. This is what you would find in a tundra. Pioneer species in the tundra. Okay, over a period of time, you are going to have soil produced. If something happens and it wipes out a species, a fire, um, flooding, something has destroyed the ecosystem that's there, but the soil is still present. You will start from the soil, you will have grasses and bushes, eventually larger trees, and then you will have the large forest that is going to be your climax community. Your climax community is a stable community where you are not going to have any big changes from that point on. If a species dies out, it will be replaced by something that's going to be about the same. You usually have most organisms in the in-between areas. For example, you'll find most of your rabbits and deer and things like this in the area before the trees actually get there. They may hide in the trees, but then they come out to eat in the pastures. Secondary succession is when you have one ecosystem, like I said, that through burning, flooding, or something has damaged to where you still have the ecosystem soil present, but you no longer have the plants that are there. If you start with a place that already has dirt, then you were talking about secondary succession. It can be simply where one species of plant or whatever takes over and replaces the other. Compare and contrast aphotic and photic areas in a aquatic ecosystem. Uh, what is a biome? Give me a second. Biomes are areas of land where all the conditions are basically the same. If you're in a desert, it's going to be basically hot and dry. If you're in a tundra, it's going to be cold and dry. If you're in a tropical rainforest, it's going to be warm and very wet. All the conditions in the area are basically going to be the same. An aquatic system is one that is going to be water-based. In these areas, the main things that are going to make an impact are going to be the amount of sunlight, and salinity that is going to be in the area. 75% of the earth is covered with water. The majority of that is salty. We have freshwater biomes that are going to be your lakes, ponds, streams. We have marine biomes, which is going to be mainly the salt. Notice they differ in salinity, depth, light, that is whether it's photic with light or aphotic without, and temperature that is going to be located there. And the bottom of all water systems, if they're have any kind of depth, it's going to be cold. If you have high salts, and we're talking about our oceans, you're going to have a marine ecosystem. If you notice, most of the area where you have the most organisms is going to be sunlit. If you are in an area where it is going to be a sandy shore, you have the bottom that is constantly moving, and you have to be able to burrow or find some way to get into so you don't get washed out. If you are in a rocky area, many of the organisms are going to figure out ways to attach, like the barnacle that we saw in class. If you're in the open ocean, you are in the euphotic, or this is the photic zone. This is where the sunlight can go down to about 30 meters. Below that particular point, you start getting into the darker areas where you do not have sunlight to where you can see colors. Beneath that, you have the abyssal zone. The abyssal zone is complete darkness. I want you to notice some of the organisms that you have. You have your turtles, jellyfish, starfish, and the intertidal. You have your plankton that could be in either of them, but plankton is also found in the open photic zone along with the whales and flying fish and sharks and others. When you get into the deeper areas, you're looking at your squid and your octopus. You're also looking at in the very depths where you have your anglerfish and your vampire fish and some of the other organisms that we talked about, like tube worms. Mixed water. Between freshwater systems and saltwater systems, you have an area where the water mixes. With flooding coming down from the freshwater side, sometimes you have higher amounts of fresh water. If you have large tides coming in from the other direction, the salt water takes over. This water is called brackish, meaning that it is a fresh and salt water mix. It is a nursery where we have many different organisms that come in to have their babies. Tides. In areas that are affected by the tides are going to be called intertidal zones. These are going to be due to the gravitational attraction of the moon and the sun. Because the moon is closer, it's going to have the greatest impact. Okay, again, rocky, have to be able to withstand wave action so that they don't get pounded. Sandy bottom, intertidal zones, constant motion in the bottom. Photic zone is where you have sunlit to the bottom of it. Plankton is going to be found in the sunlit areas. It, as well as some of the other materials that are being eaten, will float down. And in the bottom of the ocean, you generally have either predators or you have organisms that are filter feeders and absorb their food from the stuff floating in the water. Freshwater biomes, I want you to notice on this, you have a cold layer in the bottom, you have one on warm on top. It could be photic all the way down if it's not too deep. I do want you to notice that the deeper you go into the water, the lower the amount of oxygen and light that you're going to have. Most of the species diversity is going to be on the edges. And this is an example. If you notice, you have most of your species that are going to be found on the edge. You do not need to know what the names of these are. You just need to know examples of where most of the organisms are going to be found. There are two factors that are going to make a big difference on whether something is going to be a hot or cold biome or the type of climate. One of them is going to be latitude. Latitude is the distance from the equator. Since the equator gets the most direct sunlight, it's going to have the most light concentrated in that area, and you will have most life per acre live in that area. As you get further away, the lights from the sun are going to be further spread out, and you are going to have less life in those areas. Altitude, on the other hand, is going up mountains. You have basically the same impact on organisms going up a mountain as you do away from the equator. Biomes have distinctive climates and organisms. They are named according to their plant life. For if you notice on the top row on this, you have all forest. On the second row, you have all grasslands. On the bottom, you have different types of deserts. Notice that the cold forest is your conifer or your taiga. The one that goes from very cold to very hot is your deciduous. These are the ones that lose their leaves. The tropical rainforest, on the other hand, stays warm all year round with high levels of rainfall. This particular one is the one that has the canopies and the different layers with the understory. Tundra can either be a polar grassland or it can be a cold desert. It depends on how the term is being used in the book. Temperate grasslands would be like here, where you have your eagles, prairie dogs, buffalo. Tropical grassland is also called the savanna. This is the grassland that occurs in Africa. Remember, they have a rainy season and then it starts drying up. This is where your elephants, zebras, giraffes, and all will be found. If you notice on the bottom one, you have grasses. You do not have trees and deserts. There may be selective ones, but you do not have, for the most part, the type of life that you do in other areas. Okay, this one shows you rough areas and ideas of what covers the most. Uh, if you notice, the one on this picture is mainly the taiga. There are some places that claim that the grassland is the most. On this test, we're going to be using the taiga is the one that covers the majority of the area. On this one, pause here, go back and look, compare. Which one has the highest amount of moisture, which ones have the least, which ones have the highest temperature, which ones have the highest variation. Give you a hint, the larger the variation in temperature, the more seasons you have. Does the rainforest have a season? If it stays 25 degrees year round, there is no season. Taigas are the conifer forest. This is where you are going to have either at the mountaintop or across the top of Canada. You are going to have mainly trees such as the fir, spruce, pine. Rainfall is 30 to 10 to 30 inches of, excuse me, 30 inches of rain or higher. It's 40 to 100 centimeters. 130-day growing season is about average. While the tundra is dry and doesn't have many things living there, as you go away from the pole, you are going to find that you have more species and larger species. The most species and the most layers are going to be at the equator. Okay, remember in the tropical rainforest, you have life that is going to occur in canopies or in layers. Emergent are the very, very tallest. You have upper canopy, lower canopy, understory. Notice most of the roots are going to be spread out. They are going to be right close to the surface. There is very little nutrients in the tundra and in the tropical rainforest, the nutrients are in the soil itself. Deciduous forest and grasslands have some of the best nutrients in the world. Running through different types of characteristics. So pause this one. Make sure you can identify some of the common animals and common plants that are in these areas. If you are going to live in the tundra, you have to be able to adapt to extreme cold. So you are going to migrate or hibernate. If you're an animal, if you are a plant with permafrost in the area, you don't have deep roots, you have shallow. On the taiga, you have very cold weather again. You will either have hibernating, you have the shape of the trees that can drop limbs and pop back up with getting rid of snow. On the temperate deciduous forest, you have species that learn how to withstand the cold by dropping their leaves. And the desert, very hot. Organisms in this area in the desert are going to be nocturnal or undergo estivation. Grasslands, uh, you have species that have adapted to fire so that if a fire does break out, they can either go down in the ground or they have deep roots and they can pop back up. Tropical rainforest, we have a lot of different species. Many of them have adapted to live up in the canopy. You also have uh, bright colors as a warning sign of different poisons that may be in the area, like your poison dart frogs. Study and good luck.